Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome to A Time for Truth show. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, and it's a pleasure to have you back with us again. For those of you who want to subscribe to the show, go on YouTube, click on A Time for Truth show, and you hit the subscribe button. We would love to have you as one of our permanent viewers. This will avail you of all the past episodes. I want to get going immediately with tonight's show because we have a very renowned guest that we're very lucky to have with us on the program, all the way from Denver, Colorado. And before I bring him on and introduce him, we've been beset the last few years with COVID. But if we look at this spiritually, and we look at sometimes how in the Bible there were plagues, right? We had plagues. And the plagues were there, and they were to resolve difficulties, problems in humanity, strife, prejudice, bigotry, what happened all down time of humanity. And in the United States, unfortunately, there was a period of time and what was much worse. It's been improving steadily thanks to the efforts of many human civil rights leaders with a lot of humanity. And today we are very honored to have on the show Bishop Acen Phillips, who worked very closely with Martin Luther King. There you see the bishop, who was born in Mississippi in 1935, and unfortunately went through a catastrophic event at the age of 5, witnessing the lynching of his uncle, which created tremendous impact on him and forged his life as a freedom-fighting civil rights minister. There you see him with President Clinton. He moved to Kansas City, where he received most of his formal education, and then to Denver, where he went on to marry his loving wife and receive his calling as a minister. There you see him with President Obama. The bishop is founder, chairman of Opportunities Industrial Center, founder and chairman of Production Incorporated, CEO of Gardner Construction, developing Bethlehem Square affordable housing. He's the executive director of the Mount Gilead Foster Care Center, a 24-hour care facility for dysfunctional youth, and the Mount Gilead Housing Corporation. He's the founder and executive director of Mount Gilead Youth Job Marts. And he has so many awards that I'll have to abbreviate them. But we'll start with the 1991 Martin Luther King Jr. Humanitarian Award, the Man of the Year Award, the Community Service Award of 1989, the IMWMW Community Service Award, Minister of the Year, 95, the 97 Ohio Barfield Community Service Award, the 98 Cheyenne MLK Community Service Award, the Church Magazine Christ Star Award for Pastor of the Year, 1991 MLK Junior Colorado Housing Commission Award, 1995 Denver Council Distinguished Service Award. And, you know, I could go on and on and on and on. He has so many accolades and recognitions. We'll continue with the Afro-American Living Legend Award, And to be able to have a show with him, and not just a show of his awards and accomplishments, he has a 40-year Distinguished Service Award from the Greater Metro Denver Ministries Alliance. The bishop is a 3-term president of the Northern District Baptist Convention. He's a former vice president of the National Baptist Convention, former Colorado SCLC president, and president of the Denver's Ministers Alliance. He was awarded the 2020 State of Colorado Trailblazer winner for the work he did with Mr. King, Dr. King, from 1958 to 1968 with Martin Luther King. And he's celebrating 65 years of ministries. Welcome, Bishop Acen Phillips, to a Time for Truth show.
I'm blessed. Good to be here with you today, Doctor.
You know, it's a tremendous honor to have you, and I really had to cut short your bio because you've achieved so much in your lifetime. So I want to get right to it because what you have to share is so important to relay. So first thing I wanted to ask you, when you had that horrific event when you were 5 years of age, what were your thoughts back then?
It was kind of disturbing because to see someone humiliated and tarred and feathered, drugged down the street and then hung at such a young age, it put a permanent imprint on my mind that it was necessary to make a change. It did not register with me why, just because of the pigmentation of my color, I'm looked at it being 3/5 human, not to be a human being. And in Mississippi in those days, Billboard was the governor, and they had huge signs all over the place: blacks not allowed, Negroes, and they used the other word, this you cannot drink water here, you cannot go here. And I never will forget one occasion we were just walking down the street just for Christmas, bought me a brand new pair of shoes, and some white couple was coming toward us, and he said, "Son, we got to get off the street and walk in the mud to allow the white people to pass." And I said, "Son, but that doesn't make any sense, Dad. We were on the street first." He said, "You got to choose your battles." He said, "If I choose to fight this battle about a sidewalk, I lose my heritage in you." He said, "The day will come when others will get off the street for you." But said, "I can wash your shoes, I can take the mud off the shoes, but if they take your life, they take my legacy." I never will forget it. And some years later, when they honored me here in Colorado and gave myself and two of my friends what they call the City Fathers Award at the state capitol here in Colorado, and it amazed me that all of the delegations stood to honor us, and my mind went back to 5 years old when my father said, "The day will come when others will move aside for you." And it taught me how to measure my steps and to understand that when you go into battle, you want to make sure you weigh all of your resources and you can come out more than a conqueror. And I attribute so much of my wisdom and knowledge to my father, who was only privileged to get an 8th grade education, but was one of the wisest men I've ever known in my life.
That's quite a story. What was his first name?
It was Lee T. Phillips. They all called him affectionately Dad Phillips. He never actually pastored the church. He was always the associate, the number 2 man in the church. And he used to tell me number 2 is the best number in the whole structure of numbers. That number 2, if you multiply 2 times 2, you get 4. If you add 2 plus 2, you still get 4. There's not another number that can do that. The most important number in what we call the triunity of God, God, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, that Jesus is always in the center. He's always number 2. You can't get to the Father without coming through him. You can't get to the Holy Spirit without coming through him. Then my dad said, it's kind of like being water. He said, if you're water, you got to come through the water, get to the ice, and come back through the water. You want to get to the steam. the secret to life is being flexible and being like the agape kind of love where you make adjustments. And he made so many contributions. He was so loved in his day until when they had the joint services in Kansas City, they wouldn't begin the worship service until Lee T. Phillips arrived, gave the opening prayer. Prayer was my father's focus, and he did so much for me all through my ministry. And I thank God for the wisdom and the energy that he invested in me as what I call one of his baddest children. If there ever was a bad Phillips, it was me. But my father loved me so much and would carry me with him wherever he went. And I loved him so much that even when he was chastising me, I'd look up and tears in my eyes while he was whipping me and said, Dad, you know I love you. And he had to drop the switch. He said, boy, just go ahead on. But to have someone to tutor you and to love you and to share with you and to get you to understand that you've got to wait your time to make your investment. And sometime when you're being challenged and you have strong opposition coming against you, always look at the burden, because inside of every burden, there's always a blessing.
Amazing. Well, it makes total sense because I see that your father was a extremely supportive man who really didn't care about personal gain. He wasn't there for what he was going to benefit from, but he was there for how he could let his family, his community, his world go forward. Makes total sense to me. My father was similar in the way he raised me. Is very interesting. We have a lot of similarities. I wanted to ask you, how did you, as you were ministering, how was it that you came to meet Martin Luther King?
It was amazing. I was on my honeymoon. My wife and I went to Omaha, Nebraska, and we were so poor at the time that we had to drive and take a passenger with us. The passenger paid the freight for us to go. A good friend of mine, Elroy Johnson, we were both in the same church at New Hope Church. And when I got to Omaha, the ministers' conference was there, and we were just kind of standing outside, chit-chatting, talking with each other. This little short fella came up, and I was talking with him. We talked about 15, 20 minutes, got to be real good friends. I didn't really know how important he was. He told me his name was Martin. I told him my name was Acen. We went back into the auditorium, and it's about 5,000 folk gathered there, and all of a sudden, they nominated Martin Luther King Jr. to become vice president of the National Baptist Congress of Education. And I walked this little fella that I've been talking with out by the curb. I said to my wife, my God, I didn't know that was Martin Luther King Jr. But from that day until the day he died, we were the best of friends. And Martin was so humble in his spirit, born in a silk stocking family, born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Honestly, one of the best education you could get anywhere, but he always knew how to humble himself. And when you saw him, you saw a person who was compassionate from the inside to the outside. And we always walked. I was younger than he was, and certainly didn't have the reputation to go in and out where he went. But every time he would come to Colorado, he would give me his bag. He said, Acen, you keep my bag, and I'm going to tell them my speeches in the bag. So if they try to keep you out the room, I'll tell them they got to let you in because you got my message. And I kept his bag every time he'd come in and out. And we had so much personal time sharing together. And he came in and out of Denver many times just by choice. It was a city that he loved. And my pastor, Dr. M.C. Williams, was very close to Dr. King and made it possible for me to meet him, walk with him, and share with him. And his vision was so clear, his concepts about nonviolence. And it was hard to comprehend at the time because there were always two facets. There was Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael, another crowd that was violent and wanted to activate violence. And I said to Martin one day, I said, how is it that you stay on this note of nonviolence? He said, well, the strongest power in the universe is the power of love. And the scriptures declare that if you really want to conquer your enemy, learn how to maintain self-control. So that if you can make yourself be still, God will fight your battle. And if you learn how to bow down and get out of God's way, he has direct access to your enemy. So the most violent thing you can do is be nonviolent and allow God to deal with your enemies. I watched that happen as we were on the bridge going across, and it was our second time going across that bridge, and the soldiers, not the soldiers, but the policemen were coming after us on horses. And Martin had to make a decision because a lot more people would have been damaged like the first time we tried to go across. And he said, let's bow. He bowed, and we all bowed after him all across that bridge. And then a gust of wind came across our back and lifted the horses up off the ground. There's a picture you can still see where the horse was just raised up. The men almost fell. The President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, saw that picture, and because of that, called Dr. King, and he ended up in D.C., and that's the root cause of Lyndon Johnson making the decision to intervene with the movement with Dr. King. His thesis was absolutely correct. Anytime you learn how to love your enemy, be good to those who despitefully use you, and if they force you to go 1 mile, volunteer to go another. He lived that, and he taught it to me. It was a hard lesson for me to learn because of all the tragedy that was in my background and what I had experienced in Mississippi. But when it came to the test of it, the Ku Klux Klan burned 3 Ks in the front yard of our church in Denver. And the Minutemen came down the back alley and threw a smoke bomb in it. And I called for the Black Panthers to come and guard the church while we had church. And unlike most other cities, in Colorado, the Panthers and the lawyers, the doctors, everybody worked together with the church. We called it a combination of street and church working together. And the old pastors had trained me that you preach in the church on Sunday morning, but on Monday morning you go to the streets and take that same message to every nightclub, every bar. It doesn't matter what it is. Everybody needs to hear the word of God, and you take not just news, but make sure you take them some good news, something that will give them hope in the midst of the challenges of life.
Well, we have a video. Engineer, if you can put the video on for our viewers. And this is a video where they were interviewing you about, what you were discussing and, your viewpoint on what had happened in those years and Martin Luther King. And, I remember when I was a young boy, watching on television. And I got to relate to you that it's interesting that the feeling of the show that you and I are having is a totally different feeling than I really had with any other participant. And I can feel, besides your words, I can actually feel the energy that you are living in and putting out. And that it's very interesting to be experiencing it because it's a very warm, it's a very nice energy that I'm feeling. I'm sure it's coming across to the viewers also. Buddha, do you have that video ready? Let's play it, please. Let's play it for the viewers.
His battle song, and that song is, "If I can help somebody, then my living shall not be in vain." The last time Dr. King was in Denver, he spoke over at DU, and that was on May 17th of 1967. They burned crosses, turned over cars.
It was a reminder to both of these local activists, Reverend James Peters and Bishop Acen Phillips, that hostility for the civil rights struggle wasn't limited to southern states.
The Klan said, "We're going to kill you." They called my house and threatened the kids and all that kind of thing. That happened in Denver.
But when I got to Denver, I thought I had reached paradise. I saw black folk with green grass and 5 points. I thought it was nirvana. Then I found out here in Colorado, black folk couldn't live past High Street.
Both men would lead local churches and the civil rights movement here in Denver, with their stories start in the Deep South, Peters in D.C. and Phillips in Mississippi.
I had a traumatic experience. One of my uncles was tarred and feathered and drove down the street and hanged it. So
Phillips left Mississippi and eventually came to Denver in the 1950s, where he began organizing local demonstrations. And on a trip to Omaha, Nebraska in 1958, Phillips met the man who would lead the national movement.
His name was Martin Luther King Jr. I didn't really know then how important he really was.
What was it, you've already mentioned it, but what was it like when you were with him? You know, what was the feeling that, you know, I'm feeling it in the show. It's almost like maybe to ask you is redundant, but this feeling that we have on the show, is that what he exuded all day long?
It really was. And he was what I call a regular fella. You know, when he was called on to speak, to deliver, he did it with excellence. But at the same time, when all the meeting was over, he was just a regular fella. We could sit down and laugh and talk and share together. And it was a real relationship. Many people knew him professionally, but to get to know him personally was unusual. And we both had some similar experiences. It's unusual for you to be sitting where you're sitting, and I'm sitting where I'm sitting. All my life, I've had a unique relationship with the Jewish community. One of the first commentaries of my life when I was 14 years old and struggling as a young man in Kansas City. And I was working 3 jobs, really. I had a part-time job at the post office. I worked all night long at a dairy. And then I was selling appliances for a company called Pick. And this young Jewish fella had a furniture store, and he saw me selling things, and I was so energetic and excited about what I was doing. He called me over. He said, "Son, so why don't we sit down and talk?" He said, "How much do you make selling appliances for Pick?" I said, "Oh, they pay me 10% of everything I sell." He said, "It looks like you were excellent with your ability to sell at your young age." He said, "Why don't we go into partnership together?" I said, "Man, I ain't got no money to go into partnership. I'm trying to make it from week to week." He said, "I tell you what, said, I will buy all the furniture. You sell it, and we'll split the profit 50-50. I said, "You got to be joking." He said, "No, but I got one condition." I said, "What's that?" He said, "You got to pay your tithes." I said, "Now, you Jewish, I'm Christian." He said, "Yeah, but we come from the same cloth." He said, "Now, I'm going to tell you what. If you follow this guideline, you'll always be blessed. You give God 10%, then give yourself 10%. Then you live out of the 80%. Said, if you do this all your life, you'll be blessed." And from that day to this day, sitting with you, every time I've had what I call a blessing or uplift, it's been God allowing someone from the Jewish community to come into my life. When I told you about that plane, and the rabbi paid for the plane ride. And one day I was trying to get some housing for some young men and women that were challenged. And this young Jewish realtor came in and allowed me to access a 155 unit building to house these young people in. They were discards from community. Many of them, they had what they call a 24-hour foster care system. I didn't have any money to buy the building at all, but he said to me, he said, "Do you want the building?" He put up all of his resources, his talents, his gifts. And when I got ready to close on the building, all I needed was $156. I didn't have the $156. He said, "Write him a check." And I said, "Well, I can't cover the check." He said, "Take a look at your rent roster and see maybe somebody owes you some money." Now, this is almost unbelievable. I looked at the rent roster. Somebody on the rent roster owed exactly $156. I wrote the check. We bought this 155 unit building. And I tell folk all the time, it's no secret what God can do. And when you see the Jewish community and the black community walking hand in hand together because of so many similarities. And I was teasing my friend Rabbi Steve Foster one day. I said, I think God loves black folk a little bit more than he does Jews. He said, what are you talking about, Acen? I said, well, he had to get you all out of Egypt to get you blessed. But he blessed us right here in America. I said, we started off as slaves, and one day the slave became the president of the United States of America in Barack Obama. It's amazing how good God has been. But one of my theses for ministry has always been, it takes the black and white keys if you're going to play the Star Spangled Banner or sing Amazing Grace. It doesn't matter. And that was Martin's concept. If we can understand how we can learn how to walk together as children of God and walk in the light, it'll become a beautiful light, and it'll give us the sunshine both by day and by night.
Absolutely. So well put. I want to ask you, what has been the driving force behind what you've been doing your whole life long? What is inside of you that you feel is the fire and the energy that has always propelled you?
I think when I watched how my father moved us out of Mound Bar, Mississippi, and back to Clarksville, Mississippi, and finally to Kansas City, Kansas, my father had his own concept of how to bring deliverance to us as a people. He created his own concept of an underground railroad. We had a big old White House in Mount Bow, and he was working his way to ownership of the land. Today, Mount Bow is one of those fine cities that has a lot of black ownership, but in those days it was sharecropping. And no matter how he worked and hard as he worked, at the end of the season, he was always a day late and a dollar short. He finally folded up the concept and moved us to Clarksville. Then he came to Kansas City, bought a little shotgun house, and it was leaning one side. It had a potbelly stove in the middle of it, and that heated, and we cooked on it. No flue at all. You could see the ground. And when he brought us from Mississippi to Kansas City at 333 Nebraska Avenue, I said, my God, Dad, why did we move out of this big White House to this shack? He said that White House belonged to Mr. John, but every bit of this ground at 333 Nebraska belongs to Lee T. Phillips and family. He had a little old garage thing in the back. He called it a stone house. He turned the garage into a little apartment house and began to send back to Mississippi and bring family and then friends and loved ones. They would come and stay in the stone house free till they got on their feet. Once they got on their feet, many of them went and bought houses larger than our house. But he rejoiced every time someone could come and they could get deliverance and move out. And that whole concept of reaching out and blessing somebody else always touched me. And it's been a thesis and a theme in my life. Then I had my own personal traumas when I got to Denver. And that's the first time I've ever been homeless in my life. And I never will forget, my brother-in-law met me at a car wash, and I was sleeping in my car. And I was too proud to go back home. I didn't want my dad to know that I'd gotten hit and got stuck. And so I was going to try to work my way out of it. And he asked me for a ride home that day. He said, I hope I'm not taking you out of my way. I said, no, anywhere I go is in your way because I'm sleeping in my car. He said, you don't have to do that. I said, my mother will take you in. She'll give you a place. I said, man, your mother don't know me. He took me home with him that evening, and his mother was screaming at him because he'd messed up her good child with his head. And my God, by the end of the day, he hollered and he said, Mother dear, I got a friend with me. His name is Ace, and he's homeless. She quit fussing at him, rushed to the door. And these words penetrate my life. She took one look at me and said, son, come in. Your room in my house is downstairs. I lived there with her for 2 years until I graduated from Denver University.
Wow.
And she was like another mother to me. So when I think about homeless people and the challenge they have today, I think about my father and then my current mother-in-law, been married to Dr. Phillips now 65 years, and we had 5 wonderful children that we shared together. But I wrote this book, I just finished it, called A Man to Match God's Mountain. And the whole thesis is that every time God gives you a mountain, He always gives you strength to climb it. He gives you a valley, He gives you the tenacity to get through. You never go into a valley, you go through the valley by design, because God has a blessing on the other side of the mountain. And that the whole world is always directed by the ebb and flow of mountains and valleys. So God is guiding us to level plain, and the ground at the cross was level. And when you see the relationship God brings between the Christian and the Jew, and we begin to understand we're one people, we come out of one ephod, and God is guiding us in the same direction for the same purpose. It makes life a joy.
Well, Bishop, you know, it's a pleasure to have had this time with you. I look forward to meeting you in Washington, D.C., September 29th at the Caribbean African Faith-Based Leadership Conference Gala. And unfortunately, we've gone way past time, but it was well worth it. I think we're going to have some more shows, maybe talk about your book. And thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me as your guest. It was a pleasure.
Was for all of us. And for those of you watching, take this energy from this show, from Bishop Phillips and from Martin Luther King, and go forth with the strongest energy that exists in life, love. And let's change this world. Have a good night.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got. But the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your feet